locker room because we get along and see eye to eye. It's another HIAC. That's a sore subject. Like I'm laughing, but now I'm not. Now I'm sad. I even said it. It's the HIAC Wrestling Podcast. I'm Dan. That's Craig. Let's not waste any more time. We're not talking modern wrestling this week because we had a cluster F of technical difficulties last week. We're already, for the YouTube viewers, we're already going to be in black and white. For the Twitch viewers, imagine us in black and white. We're going to take a trip back down memory lane. We have 2 weeks to catch up on. Right to Craig Lagans. It's time for the wrestling historian.
Thank you, Daniel, for that splendid introduction. We've got a lot to cover because we have a lot of history. The things that have taken place in the last 2 weeks of January and the beginning of February are most iconic. Got to go all the way back to January 23rd, one of the most important dates in professional wrestling history. It was an important date for me because that was the day I got accepted into college. But what happened that same day, that same night, in Madison Square Garden, in front of 26,292 people, there was a tag team match, a 2 out of 3 falls tag team match featuring the Haiti Kid, Tiger Jackson, Dana Carpenter, and El Pancho. There was a midget 2 out of 3 falls tag team match in Madison Square Garden in front of 26,292 people. After that match, that was the beginning. That the after that match, Hulk Hogan defeated the Iron Sheik for the WWF Heavyweight Championship
Oh wow,
in
wow.
5 minutes. In 5 minutes and 10 seconds. Yeah, the match before that was a 2 out of 3 falls midget match between the Haiti Kid, Tiger Jackson, Dana Carpenter, and El Pancho. And Hulk Hogan making his first match back in Madison Square Garden in 5 years. Sorry, 4 years
Right.
since he left the WWF. He defeated the Iron Sheik in 5 minutes and 10 seconds to become the WWF Heavyweight Champion,
Huh.
starting arguably the greatest run in professional wrestling history in terms of exposure, in terms of mainstream media, and in terms of attention, the heights
Yeah.
of which wrestling has come close to, but not since. But that started Hulkamania, which would give way to WrestleMania, which would give way to the WWE that we see today. But it started January 23rd, 1984.
You wouldn't agree that Stone Cold Steve Austin was a big. I'm asking. I'm not asking that way. I said, do you? Would you
No,
think that Hulkamania was bigger than what Stone Cold Steve Austin?
Hulkamania was bigger only because it started a trend of professional wrestling in the
Okay,
mainstream media.
I got you.
Um, Austin's and I'm going to get into numbers later on in this
Okay,
segment. Austin's run, and followed by and with The Rock and the Attitude Era, uh, was seen by more millions of people because of the availability of it, and cable television being what it was, and the national media picking up on the resurgence of professional wrestling. But Hulk Hogan was the one, and his popularity made it possible for professional wrestling to return to network TV.
gotcha. Okay,
But
interesting.
it started, and obviously other historians, other people can bicker back and forth,
Sure.
and with good reason, because both men have a claim to it. But January 23rd, 1984, 26,292 fans in Madison Square Garden got to witness history. That same date, January 23rd, 1987, Hacksaw Duggan would lose a loser leave town match to the one man gang. Hacksaw Duggan had never lost a loser leave town match. He had beaten other stars like Ted DiBiase, like Buzz Sawyer, in loser leave town matches, so people thought this was a foregone conclusion, especially since Hacksaw Duggan had defeated one man gang several times before. But Hacksaw Duggan lost a loser leave town match to one man gang for the simple fact that he had already signed a contract with the WWF and would debut 3 months later, making his debut at WrestleMania 3
Ah,
to run in on the after taping several video vignettes first, but Hacksaw Duggan's official leaving of the Mid South area, the territory that made him famous. The reason why the WWF wanted him in the first place, they wanted to take all the big stars that were selling out arenas in other territories. Well, Hacksaw Duggan would lose to the one man gang, and because he had signed with the WWF, one man gang not to be outdone would debut in the WWF 6 months after that. Uh, stay on that same date, a very iconic date, January 23rd, 1989. Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard would defeat the Rockers, Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels, in their WWF debut and their Madison Square Garden debut. Speaking of people that were big stars in other areas and would
wow.
come to the WWF, but Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, 5 years after Hulkamania, would make their Madison Square Garden debut by defeating the Rockers.
Wow.
On that same date, January 23rd, 1996, another big debut as Randy Savage would go against Hulk Hogan on on that particular Clash of Champions. Uh, but that would be the WCW debut of Elizabeth.
Ah, yes.
Return to wrestling to interfere in the Randy Savage Hulk Hogan match. On that same card, though, Conan would defeat Psychosis in both of their WCW debuts.
Ah, yes.
That would start the Luchador reunion and the Luchador division in the WCW. Uh, they would be followed by Rey Mysterio, Juventud Guerrera, Eddie, but Conan and Psychosis would make their WCW debut that same night at Clash of Champions. And that's staying on that date, January 23rd, 2000. The 13th annual Royal Rumble in Madison Square Garden, back to Madison Square Garden. That 13th annual Royal Rumble would be won by The Rock, but on that same card, uh, Kurt Angle would suffer his first loss in the WWE when he would lose to the debuting Taz.
Wow. That's right. That's right. That that's one of my favorite stories about ECW is the story that Taz tells about, calling Paulie calling him on the car phone as
Hmm.
he's driving and saying, "You have my blessing. Do what you got to do." I I know Taz is the butt of a joke now. Um, I don't get it. I used to like Taz, but
Always did.
I always felt kind of bad because, and we're not going to beat the dead horse about how one is, treated in one company and the other. But he was such a badass,
Daddy was.
and he got built up as a badass, and then it
Hmm.
just kind of went away, and he became an announcer, and I'm sure he didn't care because he was collecting a paycheck, and I don't mean that in an insulting way, like. Well, he was just collecting the paycheck, but he was. What I mean is, he was getting paid and probably paid well for his services. But I always kind of felt bad that that's what happened to his career because I thought he was a Viral. Don't tell me to shut up. Viral's listening. I always thought he was a badass, and it kind of got swept under the rug in WWE.
I agree.
I liked
I
his
didn't think.
commentary too.
Yeah, and I didn't think he got a proper run. I thought not that he could have had a type of a Kurt Angle type run,
Right.
but I expected him to have a at least some singles championships to his credit. With a great debut he had. We saw the little vignettes, the heart beating and the
Great vignettes.
survive.
Yeah.
And to make his debut in his hometown in Madison Square Garden against then the undefeated superstar, that I mean, it was Kurt Angle was supposed to. He showed the attitude. Kurt Angle was supposed to be the top baby face, and being the first Olympic gold medalist in WWE history, professional wrestling history, you would think that would make him
Yeah.
a popular guy. Nope. Um,
Nope.
drank milk, integrity, intelligence, three eyes. Nope. But Taz coming out in his hometown, standing ovation, would defeat Kurt Angle, have Kurt Angle tap out for Kurt Angle's first ever loss in the WWF,
Insane.
WWE. Great debut. So January 23rd was a date of debuts in wrestling history. January 24th, we're going to take a little turn here into the state of professional wrestling in the 60s, specifically the NWA. Now, last week I talked about it was the birthday of Toots Mondt, one of the fathers, one of the creators of the WWF. Well, this is where the seeds were planted this week in professional wrestling history. January 24th, 1963, Lou Thesz defeated Buddy Rogers for the NWA Heavyweight Championship. That was recognized by the NWA, but it was not recognized in the Northeast. The Northeast promoters, Toots Mondt chief among them, wanted to keep Buddy Rogers as their champion because Toots Mondt booked all of Buddy Rogers' appearances in the Northeast. Madison Square Garden, Philly, Boston, Washington, D.C. He wanted to keep the money rolling in. And the only way to do that was to recognize Buddy Rogers as a champion. Only thing is, the Northeast is one part, the NWA took up everywhere else
Where
in
else?
the United States. So it was because of that slight that the Northeast promoters still recognize Buddy Rogers as the champion, that they would eventually form their own organization called the WWF. But other things had to take place before that. But Lou Thesz defeated Buddy Rogers for the NWA Championship, and Lou Thesz was the NWA champion, recognized as the NWA champion, but not by everyone. We know the Northeast, but there were other places too, which I will get to later on in this segment of the Wrestling Historian.
Oh
But
boy.
January 24th, 1963, Lou Thesz was the NWA champion to some. January 24th, 1984, one of the most amazing television tapings in WWF history took place in Allentown on this day. 5 hours of wrestling that took place for all the TV tapings, but this was a TV taping where Sergeant Slaughter defeated a guy named John Callahan, and the Iron Sheik had defeated his opponent. And Sergeant Slaughter would run into the Iron Sheik as he was making his way back to the dressing room, which would set the stage for Slaughter's face turn and the Iron Sheik Sergeant Slaughter feud that
Wow.
would propel Sergeant Slaughter into the stratosphere of popularity and would start one of the great feuds in professional wrestling. And it started on that tape. That same day was on that same taping, marathon taping in Allentown. The aforementioned Johnny Callahan would team up with Frankie Williams, and they would lose to Dr. D, David Schultz, and the debuting Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper making his first wrestling match in the WWF. After weeks of Piper's Pit, that was his first wrestling match
Wow.
against Johnny Callahan and a man he would make famous later, Mr. Frankie Williams.
Wow.
That same date, January 24th, 1988, we go to one of the most iconic TV tapings in WWF history, to one of the most epic cluster Fs in pay-per-view history. In January 24th, 1988, the NWA would hold their second ever pay-per-view, the Bunkhouse Stampede in Nassau Coliseum, only doing this to counter the WWF holding their first ever Royal Rumble on USA on the USA Network. The Bunkhouse Stampede we know was uh, the time on the tickets that was printed on the tickets was different than when the pay per view started. So when the pay per view was available to people, the matches were pretty much over, and the live crowd that came to see it didn't get to see um, the matches that were there because it started it's one to 6 o'clock and the time was 8 o'clock, so people missed a lot of the matches that were scheduled. Uh, the bunkhouse stampede itself was kind of a weird thing because you had to win. It was a battle royal in a cage, but you won by throwing someone over the cage. And Dusty Rhodes, of all people, won the first ever bunkhouse stampede. While over in on the USA in Toronto, the WWF, having a much smoother ride,
Yeah.
had the first ever Royal Rumble. Uh, Only 20 men in this Rumble, and the two Iron Men were the two people that started were Bret Hart and Tito Santana, who lasted the longest. Um, Bret Hart, in fact, would be the last man eliminated. Uh, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, the aforementioned Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who joined the WWF almost a year ago, was the 13th man entered, and he won the Royal Rumble by eliminating Bret Hart and get this, the One Man Gang, the person who defeated Hacksaw Duggan in the loser leave town match that Duggan had to lose to go to the WWF.
Yeah.
See how it all comes together?
It's all coming together.
It's all coming together. So that the first ever Royal Rumble and the NWA's Bunkhouse Stampede both took place on that same day, January  24th, 1988, with completely different results. That same day, January 24th, 1993, uh, the late great Yokozuna would win his first Royal Rumble,
Wow.
and this would be the first Royal Rumble where the winner would get a world title shot.
Oh wow.
Previously, the Rumble had been won for just bragging rights. People like John Studd had won it. The aforementioned Hacksaw Jim Duggan won it. Even the then WWF champion Hulk Hogan had won it twice as champion. But this was the first time that the winner of the Royal Rumble would actually get a WWF title shot, and it was won by Yokozuna, who would go on to win the WWF Championship at that particular WrestleMania, which we will cover in a future Wrestling Historian. And staying on that date, January 24th, 1999, Vince McMahon would win his first and only Royal Rumble on that date in 1999.
Oh boy.
Yeah. January 25th, 1963, uh, a day after losing the NWA Championship to Luthez, Buddy Rogers would defend the NWA title, only recognized in the Northeast, by defeating Bobo Brazil. Some would consider this the first ever WWF title defense, since it was only recognized in the Northeast. But the seeds of the WWF were planted then when Buddy Rogers defeated uh, Bobo Brazil. That same date, January 25th, 1978, we go to the Orange Bowl, Dan, in Miami, Florida. An outdoor stadium got to see the first ever Super Bowl of wrestling
Oh
when the
man.
NWA heavyweight champion Harley Race took on the WWF heavyweight champion Superstar Billy Graham in a 2 out of 3 fall match to determine one
Wow.
world heavyweight champion.
Wow.
To ensure there would be no funny business, there was an NWA official and a WWF official. Uh, the NWA referee for this Super Bowl match, title unification, would be Fritz von Erich, the
Oh,
WWF
wow.
official at ringside to make sure there was no funny business, Gorilla Monsoon.
I did not know that.
And this match took place in the Orange Bowl outdoor stadium in Miami. So guess what? There was a little rain.
Of course it was. Of course
Superstar
it was.
won the first fall with a superstar bear hug. Harley would win the second fall with, get this, a suplex, and the third fall, both men
Suplex.
were counted out. Superstar was bleeding freely, had the bear hug on Harley. They both tumbled outside of the ring. Both were counted out. There will be four more Super Bowl matches. The NWA versus the WWF, three more times. Uh, twice with Harley Race, once with Ric Flair, and there would be an WWF AWA Super Bowl involving Bob Backlund and Nick Bockwinkel in Toronto. But the first ever NWA champion versus the WWF champion took place January 25th, 1978, in the Orange Bowl in Miami, Florida, site of this year's Super Bowl.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And January 26th, 1987, another epic WWF TV taping. It was on this day, on this taping, the Hart Foundation would defeat the British Bulldogs. I mentioned in an earlier historian segment where the Dynamite Kid had his back injured severely in a match with Cowboy Bob Orton and Magnificent Morocco, where his lumbar vertebrae, one was crushed and another was separated. He was actually carried to the ring piggyback style by Davey Boy Smith. And when the match started, to cover the injury, Jimmy Hart hit the Dynamite Kid in the back with a megaphone. So Davey Boy had to go 1-on-2 against the Hart Foundation. Did a great job. Obviously, those three men know each other, related, known each other for years going back. So the Hart Foundation sold their ass off for Davey Boy to the point where I thought he was actually going to win by himself.
Yeah.
But the Hart Foundation took it with a heart attack and won the WWF Tag Team Championship and would give Bret Hart his first ever WWF title.
I would say that, first things first, I want to shout out Polygon Princess, who comes to Primetime Pro Wrestling events. Hello, Polygon Princess. She's listening live right now. Big supporter of Primetime Pro and big supporter of me, and vice versa. So I appreciate Polygon Princess stopping in to the room today. Thank you for listening live. Number one. Number two, and Viral is still doing Viral stuff. Anybody in the chat, Mystery is my friend, and he's just trying to distract me and screw with me. He's totally cool, but not really that cool. Kidding, Viral, not really. The second thing is Bret Hart. You know, he that book that came out. I kind of the book didn't help his case as far as sympathy and empathy as far as what happened in wrestling. I'll say that.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there are worse people in wrestling. However, I do think it's weird to say. It's not that he's underrated, but I don't think he was champion during a downturn in the company, and I don't think he was the problem.
No.
I don't think a lot of people would say he's the problem, but going back and watching some of his stuff in the cold light of day compared to some of the stuff that's happening on TV now is worlds away. And I was having a discussion with Justin, Justin America.
I do.
I was having a text discussion with him about wrestling that he made me think about something which you might ponder for another time or now.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know why mentioning Bret Hart's title reign made me think of this. That perhaps the ratings is perhaps people don't want to see wrestling; they want to see the storylines, right? That the majority of
Hmm.
people want to see the drama, and nobody really cares outside of wrestling fans, of course,
Hmm.
about wrestling matches, and that's why even though the wrestling matches are being featured a little more than usual, that the ratings are down, and if that they went back to crash TV, as it was called at one point, that the ratings might go up again. Not necessarily a attitude era, but segments, story. And I don't know how to take that, and I don't think he's wrong, but I think that's a lot of things that when we talk about those years, the dark years of the WWF when Nitro was kicking the crap out of him, Bret Hart was on top and he was out wrestling everybody on both rosters. Even though you and I say that NWA and WCW 9 times out of 10 had the better wrestling,
Yeah.
not Bret, not Bret Hart. There's a handful of guys that no way, and Bret Hart would be one of them. And I'm telling you, looking back at some of that stuff, man, he was so good. Again, underrated is not the word, but I love revisiting his matches. It's the guy that you watch where you're like, this is real. I
Yeah.
know it's not, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, and Bret Hart was always a guy that even if you watched nothing but Hart Foundation matches, you knew Bret was the guy.
Oh, sure.
You know, Bret was the man. I mean, you couldn't take your eyes off him. And you take an informal poll, just talk to any WWF fan back then who was the best wrestler in the company, and they'd say Bret Hart. And Bret Hart was as far away from a belt as you can possibly have
Yeah.
when he was with the Hart Foundation,
Yeah.
and Hogan was on top, and Savage was on top, and those guys. But everyone knew that Bret Hart was the best wrestler in the company. And the years might have been down, but Kevin Nash still and will always be the WWF champion that drew the least amount of money during their championship reign. So as down as the business may have been with Brett on top, it's never going to be Diesel bad.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that. But yeah, January 26, 1987, Bret Hart wins his first championship. On that same taping, though, that TV taping, I mentioned Roddy Piper on this particular version of Piper's Pit. Uh, Piper's guest was Jesse Ventura and Bobby Heenan. And
Damn Jesse Ventura.
Jesse Ventura, Roddy produced Hulk Hogan, and Jesse Ventura brought out Andre. And Andre ripped the shirt off Hogan, ripped the chain off, inadvertently causing Hogan to bleed. And Andre turned on Hulk Hogan and says, "I challenge you for your championship," setting the stage for what then would be the biggest wrestling event of all time, WrestleMania 3. But it started January 26th at that television taping. On that same date, January 26th, 1999, talked about Super Bowl. Well, on this particular date, January 26th, 1999, there was a Super Bowl, but at halftime, he had to switch over to the USA Network because it was halftime heat. And The Rock would lose his WWF Heavyweight Championship to Mankind via forklift. In one of the great just not one of the great matches, an empty arena match they went throughout, and the right back to catering, and Mankind is the comedy spots. Mankind hitting Rock with the people. Here's the people's plant. Here's the people's chair, and here's the people's. I don't even know what this is, and it's one of those overhead projectors. And
Oh
then
man.
when Rock was hitting Mankind in the back through catering, because the Rock's gonna have some chips and some salsa because it's mild, and he hits him even harder because the sauce was mild and not hot. Uh, but Mankind pinning the Rock via forklift, and somehow the camera was right on top of Rock to count the fall.
I just a little personal note to this. I remember being torn this year because it was the same year there was a Disney halftime show at the Super Bowl,
Yeah.
and I was not going to miss Phil Collins. Okay.
Oh, I know. Oh, damn,
Okay.
please.
Thank you for understanding.
Oh,
Especially because it was Chester Thompson's return to the band because scheduling conflicts kept him out of the band for a few years, and Ricky was a great drummer. But Chester
yeah, he was.
Thompson is the heart and soul,
Chester
Genesis
Thompson.
Live and Phil Collins, and it's goddamn
Yeah,
Chester Thompson. And
exactly.
I was flicking back and forth through because at first it was the Stone Cold update interview, wasn't it, about his neck?
Yeah, yeah,
And then once Phil Collins came on, I didn't go back.
yeah,
So people who know me will understand and
yeah,
accept that decision.
yeah. That's a wrap. As soon
Yeah.
as Phil Collins is on, that's a wrap.
Yeah. Everybody else, good night.
Yeah. And finally, on that same date, January 26th, happy belated 28th birthday to Sasha Banks.
Ah, Sasha Banks. How do
Yeah.
you think her run's not done, right?
Oh, no, no, no.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. I know. It's another lady who gets this weird. I saw fake woke tweets. I hate using fake. Everything becomes a cliche and overused so many times so fast these days. But the fake woke culture that was like, well, she's not even that good. What are you talking about? What?
No.
It's the same people that get mad that say, well, Fear will behave in the chat. It's the same. It's the same people that. Oh, I see what he means. I okay. She's not attractive like the other girls.
Again, what are you looking at?
What that doesn't what does that matter?
Yeah.
But um, it's the same people that are like, well, Chris Jericho was never that good.
Are
What? Come on.
you kidding me?
I get you're mad that he's in AEW and he's touting the company line. That's what he's there for. But calm the hell down. I really hope. I really still hope we get the Sasha Banks Bailey blow off down the
Yeah,
line somewhere.
of course. And they've been teasing it for going on 3 years now. So
For crying out loud.
yeah,
I'm still happy that Bailey went heel. That's just a side note. But anyway, Craig, back to you.
yeah, and she's really turned into it, and the fans have accepted it. So, what do you think will get the bigger pop? The Bailey Sasha final, or when the Bailey returns to hugging everyone?
That
Okay.
Bailey returning eventually. That's the whole point, isn't it? Redemption
Yeah.
eventually.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Take your show back.
That's okay. We're gonna skip the next day, January 27th, 1981. I mentioned the aforementioned Roddy Piper and Piper's Pit. Well, before he came to the WWF, folks, Roddy Piper was a big deal in the NWA. And on this particular day, January 27th, 1981, was really his coming out party. He defeated Ric Flair for the United States Heavyweight Championship. Now, Roddy Piper had been a big star in on the West Coast, but he came to the on Ric Flair's behest, came to the Mid Atlantic area, which was the hotbed of the NWA. And Ric Flair was this was the year he was going to win his first world title, but in grooming him, Ric Flair was the best wrestler, arguably in the United States. So Roddy Piper came in, and Roddy Piper, showing the true force of being a heel, is the only person that could have made Ric Flair, who at the time was the most hated wrestler in the Mid Atlantic area in its history. Roddy Piper was the only one that could turn Ric Flair face.
Yeah. Yep.
And when he defeated Ric Flair for the United States title, he put himself on the map. And I've said this before on this very podcast on HIAC Talk Radio. What my favorite, one of my favorite promos of all time. I'm going to say it's my favorite because I can't think of any others. I'm not thinking of any other. When Roddy Piper came on to date and his first appearance as the United States champion, and to because at the time when Roddy Piper defeated Ric Flair, he was already the NWA television champion. And he came on to the set with the United States belt, and he had a present for Ric Flair. He had a little box wrapped up in a bow, and he asked Rick to come out. And this is back when two wrestlers can stand in front of each other without it being a brawl. And he gave Flair his present, and Flair legitimately had no idea what was in the box. And he opened it up, and it was the NWA TV Championship. So, and Piper's the vintage Piper voice. So there you go. Because and I'm giving you the NWA TV belt because you wouldn't get it no other way. So that's yours, and this is mine. Pointed to the United States Championship, and then Flair came right back with another epic promo. You never realized it when you had it. You certainly don't realize it now. This is one of the most prestigious belts in the NWA, and whether a punk like you knows it or not, Ric Flair doesn't wear anything that he hasn't earned. So I'll put this aside. If I'm lucky enough to win it one day, I'll wear it with pride. And said, "Oh, I got a present for you, Piper." And then Flair pulled out the foreign object that Piper used to knock out Ric Flair. And brother, Ric Flair's wrapped more of these than, brother, anything you've ever had. So you get ready, cause my friend. And Ric Flair takes off his jacket, and Piper takes off his jacket, and Ric Flair rips his jacket into shreds and say, just like I can tear up this $300 sports coat, I'm gonna grind you up and spit you out in a promoter's building that can bring you and me together in the same ring. And favorite promo of all time. Two of the greatest guys of all time at their absolute best. But it all started January 27th, 1981, when Roddy Piper defeated Ric Flair for the United States Championship. I'm out of breath. I'm already blown up just doing a Flair imitation, so I'm not going to do the
Really?
whole thing. Uh, that same date, January 27th, uh, I, I don't know how
Okay.
they do it. I don't know how Ric Flair does it.
You know,
I'm,
people commented about Flair sticking around too long and whatever. That's neither here nor there. That
yeah.
man had the stamina that you and I will never ever have.
I encourage anyone, if you haven't already seen it, it's available on, I believe it's available on, should be on demand, or at least not on Blu-ray. Ric Flair's 30 for 30.
Oh, it's
When
great.
he talk,
It's
when
not
he
on
talk,
Blu-ray. It's only on DVD.
oh damn, okay, but it's available is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's out there. I
Um,
have it.
but you talk when Flair talks about the Vern Gagne Wrestling School, the training that they had to go through, uh, carrying firemen carrying people up staircases. The Vern Gagne method, as much as it's criticized and lambasted, it produced Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat, the Iron Sheik, Ken Patera. Say what
Vader.
you will about Vader. Say what you will about their matches or the quality of matches. Anyone from the Vern Gagne School of Wrestling ain't getting tired. Okay? They may put on a bad match or a good match, but the one thing they ain't gonna be is tired.
Nope. Polygon Princess just said Ric Flair is goat, and also
Yeah,
DVD. Ew, give me 4K HDR, please.
yeah,
Yeah, it was
most
transmitted
definitely.
in HD, and they didn't release it on Blu-ray. Come on, ESPN. What the?
Yeah.
I almost
I mean,
cursed.
I still have it on my DVR, but yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, Ric Flair's never gonna get tired. I mean, you have to understand, he and Steamboat, just him and Steamboat alone, did over 1,060-minute draws.
Jesus Christ.
Okay, sometime 4 or 5 times a week. But that's just with Steamboat. I mean, Flair went 60 minutes with Jack Briscoe. Flair went 60 minutes with Greg Valentine. Flair would go 60 minutes with one of the Von Erichs, with Harley Race weekly. So
Just as an example, I have seen Sting versus Flair, and I'm just saying I because it's I'm talking about me, and we all have. But Sting versus Flair, what 1,000 times?
yeah,
1,000 times. It was the same match, but it was never not entertaining.
no, and it's very sad that the prime Ric Flair versus Ricky Steamboat matches aren't on YouTube. They weren't filmed in their entirety, but and it's kind of like a goat Wilt Chamberlain situation. Unless you saw it for yourself, unless you were there, you really couldn't. You can't convey how special it was. But Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat, 1 hour draws throughout the Carolinas and Richmond and South Carolina and in the Omni, and even the one they had in the Meadowlands in 1985, the first time the NWA came north, were epic. And like I said, they'll go 60 minutes and it could be the same match or it will be different. But the one thing, it's they're not going to be tired at the end.
Nope.
And I'm tired just now, just talking about Ric Flair, so I know I couldn't be Ric Flair.
Yeah, no.
No. That same date, January 27th, unfortunately, 1993, we said goodbye to a legend. January 27th, 1993, the death of Andre the Giant.
Ah,
At
that
only, yeah,
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Finish your thing.
Only 46.
It's interesting. We all have an expiration date,
Yeah,
and he knew his was coming sooner than the most of us. Then the most of us? That was improper English, but you get what I mean.
yeah,
And watching that, aside from the Hogan stuff, which I think is bogus, that HBO documentary, just like the Ric Flair 30 for 30, if you have not seen that, uh, grab that. Grab that
yeah.
somehow. I have to check if that's released yet because that was it was masterfully done. Of
You
course it
bet it
was.
was. Mm. My only gripe with the Andre the Giant HBO thing, it became the Hulk Hogan Vince McMahon show,
Yeah, that's what
and
I
it
mean.
yeah, and for some reason it came all about WrestleMania 3, which anyone will tell you that was really an afterthought of the Andre the Giant's career. It may have been the it wasn't even the largest crowd he's ever performed in front
Yeah,
of, but people
maybe,
see
maybe,
that
maybe.
as the zenith of it, and it really was not.
No,
But we said goodbye to him January 27th, 1993.
yeah, man.
January 31st, 2000, Dan.
Oh boy.
The Monday Night Wars were in full effect. And on this date, the Monday Night Wars took place right here in Pennsylvania. And only 300 miles apart from each other, Monday Nitro was in Wilkes-Barre with the main event
Uh,
of Jeff Jarrett and Creative Control. I forget who they were. Who was Creative Control? I know they were named Gerald and Patrick for a reason. Wink, wink.
it was Ron and
Jerry
Don
Bris.
Harris, man.
Okay. Well, okay. Well, Gerald and Patrick,
Yeah, Gerald
not to
Patrick.
Jerry Briscoe and Pat Patterson, defeated the makeshift team of Ric Flair, Terry Funk, and the WCW Heavyweight Champion Sid Vicious. That was the main event for Nitro that night. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in Pittsburgh
Ah,
at
boy.
Raw,
Yeah.
the New Age Outlaws would take on Steve Blackman and Al Snow to a no contest because interfering in that match, coming down to ringside, were Perry Saturn, Dean Malenko,
Oh
Eddie
God.
Guerrero, and Chris Benoit.
The end of an era in WCW.
A group that came in that interfered after Road
Unreal.
Dogg was unfortunately thrown into the barrier and then over the ropes onto the laps
Maybe
of
not
these four
unfortunately.
gentlemen. Um, Whoopsie. They all entered the ring. Uh, Perry Saturn put on a suplex display, as did Dean Malenko, and Eddie would take out Road Dogg with a frog splash. And Jim Ross would name them the Radicals. And even admitting to the fact that Chris Benoit was the was still recognized as a WCW heavyweight champion. He had never been defeated for that belt.
Nope.
But this was said on Monday Night Raw. After that, they were seen backstage with Mick Foley, with Mick Foley being seen as a person who brought them in to the WWE. But Monday Night Wars, January 31st, 300 miles apart in Pennsylvania, Nitro and Wilkes-Barre, but in Raw in Pittsburgh, all eyes were on Raw for the WWE debut of Perry Saturn, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, and Chris Benoit.
I have no comment.
That's for later, but the very next day, February 1st, 1963, Dan, I mentioned something about the NWA and the beginnings of the WWF.
Yeah. Huh?
Well, on this day, February 1st, 1963, Lou Thesz would defeat Killer Kowalski in Houston to lay claim to the NWA Heavyweight Championship. Because you see, I mentioned earlier that even though Buddy Rogers had lost the NWA title to Lou Thesz, in the Northeast, Buddy Rogers was still seen as champion. Well, see, Killer Kowalski defeated Buddy Rogers in a three-fall match back in November, and he defeated because back then the NWA title was only defended in a 2 out of 3 falls match. Well, Killer Kowalski had defeated Buddy Rogers in the first fall, and in the second fall, Buddy Rogers would break his ankle.
Oh, jeez.
So uh, Killer Kowalski won the match, but in Texas, he was still declared the NWA champion. And when Thesz defeated Rogers for the NWA belt, Lou Thesz claimed himself as the NWA champion. Well, on this bout, February 1st, 1963, in Texas, Lou Thesz would defeat Killer Kowalski, and with that win, he would be universally recognized as the NWA champion.
Oh, wow.
But see, the fracture was still already in place. But while this took place in Texas and everywhere else, Lou Thesz was considered the NWA champion. But in the Northeast, Buddy Rogers was the Northeast promoters would not recognize anyone else but Buddy
Unreal.
Rogers as their champion,
Unreal.
thus laying the seeds 6 months later, sorry, 4 months later, for that famous iconic tournament in Rio de Janeiro to crown the first WWF Heavyweight Championship. Well, I mentioned January 31st, the Radicals would debut. Well, the very next night, February 1st, 2000, the Radicals would wrestle on SmackDown.
Yeah.
Yeah. Triple H and the D-Generation X told them, well, first of all, Mick Foley would introduce them to the WWE as the Radicals, saying that the reason why they didn't get over in WCW because they were not old enough,
Yeah. Well,
citing
yeah.
the Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Kevin Nash that would keep them down. And Triple H decided, well, you can stay in the WWE, but you got to beat us. And the New Age Outlaws would take on Eddie Guerrero. I'm sorry. First of all, I'm getting ahead of myself. Six Pack, X-Pac would take on Dean Malenko for the WWF Cruiserweight Championship. Irony, because it was Dean Malenko's father who taught Sean Waltman, X-Pac, how to wrestle. So those two knew each other very well. And in an absolute travesty, X-Pac would pin Dean Malenko thanks to some outside help from Tori, but that never should have happened.
God damn it.
The next bout, the New Age Outlaws, the WWE Tag Team Champions, would take on Eddie Guerrero and Perry Saturn in a 2 out of 3 falls match. Well, in the first fall, Eddie would hit the frog splash on Road Dogg, but unfortunately would dislocate his elbow on impact. One of the scariest injuries I've seen on live television. Because of that, the planned finish was scrapped.
Yeah.
I still believe they should have gone over anyway, but the New Age Outlaws defeated Eddie Guerrero and Perry Saturn. And Triple H backstage said, even though we've already won, hell, I'll take on Chris Benoit anyway. And in that bout, Triple H's first match against Chris Benoit had Triple H in the crippler crossface called by Jim Ross, something that was only called on WCW on Nitro. Triple H tapped out. Of course, the ref didn't see it. And Benoit would let go of the hold, get a hit by Triple H from behind, and he was pinned by the pedigree because everyone has to be pinned by the pedigree. But that would be the debut, the wrestling debut of Perry Saturn, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, and Chris Benoit. That same night, February 1st, 1997, I have to go back a little bit, was, I want to bring this up because it was a big night, was ECW, the night the line was crossed again. But what made this special was the Sandman would defeat Devon Dudley, but after the bout, the Dudleys would, Bubba Ray and Spike would come in to interfere in the match. and Spike would interfere on behalf of the Sandman, and Bubba would interfere on behalf of Devon. And after the after the match was over, uh, Bubba Ray and Devon hit Spike Dudley with what they called the Dudley Death Drop, and that would be the first time that move was used. And it happened February 1st, 1997, in the ECW, on the night the line was crossed again.
Amazing.
Uh, February 2nd, 1986, in the NWA in the Omni in Atlanta, the Midnight Express, Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton, would defeat the Rock and Roll Express to win their first ever NWA World Tag Team Championship,
Wow.
and would further the greatest feud in tag team wrestling history. They would end the Rock and Roll Express's second tag team title reign. They lost to the Koloff and then regained it, but this would be the Midnight Express first NWA, the first World Heavyweight Championship with Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton. Uh, the Midnight Express had debuted a year ago, and Dusty Rhodes, one of the great bookers of his day, made it clear that the the Midnight Express were to go undefeated. That Jim Cornette would not be touched for an entire year because he was playing the long game and would have the showdown between the Midnight Express and Rock and Roll Express. Well, it came to a head February 2nd, 1986, in the Omni, when the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette would win their first ever World Tag Team Championship.
Interesting. We were talking about the Midnight Express, Jim Cornette, because at the same time, Polygon Princess and I are having a discussion in the chat and Twitch, and while we were talking about the Sasha Banks thing, Jim Cornette, I paraphrased Jim Cornette or something he said last week, where he said if women are featured on the show, people will turn it off. I'm sure you heard the actual quote.
Yeah, I did.
And we guy's a legend. Rock Midnight Express are legends. Bobby Eaton is. We were talking about not saying Brett is underrated. Bobby Eaton's so underrated these days. It's a
Yeah.
crime. It should be a felony to underrate Bobby Eaton as much as he was. And I I like Jim.
Mhm.
And as far as a wrestling historian, the only person I trust more than him is you.
Thank you.
um, the guy is and I mean legitimate historian of wrestling.
Yeah.
In the same way, but he's also a categorizer of such. As far as memorabilia, it won't touch our collections won't touch his. Is what I'm saying.
No,
The man literally has a museum in his house.
he does.
And as far as again, I want to state as talking about numbers, about what wrestling used to do and what wrestling does now, he's absolutely 100% correct that it's not as big as it used to be. However, his views of wrestling to this day, stop watching it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I I value his opinion to a certain point, but at a certain point, it got to the point where it was like, okay, dude, we get it. You don't like it. It's it's not entertaining to bash it that much. Some people do, and I don't
Mhm.
discredit anybody for watching it or listening to it. Um, but the idea that women can't be draws is ludicrous. I just wanted to
Mhm.
quote Polygon Princess there. I agree.
Mhm.
Um, it's not the women that the ratings. I will elaborate this on this a little more after the wrestling historian segment because
Mhm.
Polygon Princess wanted to elaborate on the ratings thing we were talking about. I guess we'll tag the episode with that. I just wanted to elaborate on Jim Cornette for. I love the guy, but it's like, all right, just
Yeah. Enough is
be the
enough.
historian, dude.
Mhm.
You can't discredit. That's the whole point was that you can't discredit what he was in wrestling.
No,
Just can't.
you cannot. His place in wrestling is assured. Always will be.
Go ahead, my friend. Sorry about that.
That's okay. That needed to be said. Um, staying on February 2nd. That was 1986, and Midnight Express won their first World Tag Team Championship. The very next year, I only bring this up just because of the parties involved. 1987, February 2nd, 1987, in the Mid South Coliseum in Memphis, they had a 14-man tournament to decide the new AWA Southern Heavyweight Championship. The AWA Southern Heavyweight title in 1987 was a big deal because it was a precursor. It was a top Southern belt under the AWA Championship. The AWA uh, was no longer an NWA place, and the AWA champion would make frequent trips to Memphis, and so many great angles came out. Well, the world champion's only going to come in town, so whoever's the Southern Heavyweight champion is going to get a title shot, and that's when you had feuds faced against people turning heel, you know, just to get a world title shot. So the AWA Southern Heavyweight Championship was a big deal. Well, in 1987, they had a 14-man tournament on this date, February 2nd, 1987, and it was won by Austin Idol, and he defeated the CWA. Now, the CWA was the wrestling body at the time, the Continental Wrestling Association. Austin Idol defeated the CWA International Heavyweight Champion to win the AWA Southern Heavyweight title. And the CWA International Heavyweight Champion at that time was one Soul Train Jones. Virgil Vincent, by any other name, but once upon a time, Soul Train Jones was the CWA International Heavyweight Champion, and he went to the finals of a 14-man tournament, only to come up short against the Universal Heartthrob Austin Idol.
That's
Just
amazing.
had to mention that. Uh, the next February 3rd, 1989. Show you how far we've come. The main event, broadcast live on NBC. The main event was the on this particular episode of the main event tag team main event match. Big Boss Man and Akeem. Now, keep in mind, a year earlier, these same two men were fighting over the UWF Heavyweight Championship. But for right now, they were a tag team managed by Slick, and they went up against the tag team of Randy Savage, the WWF Heavyweight Champion, and Hulk Hogan. And after Elizabeth was inadvertently hit, you remember Elizabeth, I mentioned her earlier in this segment.
Hmm.
Um, Hulk Hogan took her to the back. Randy Savage went 2-on-1 against Big Boss Man and Akeem, even though Akeem slipped through the ropes and fell on his head.
God damn Akeem.
Um, but the Mega Powers exploded, and Randy Savage accused Hulk Hogan of having jealous eyes. Man, I see the way you look at Elizabeth. And Savage would turn on Hogan. Another long game of seeds that were planted back in the Royal Rumble. Well, actually, they were planted at the SummerSlam '88
Yeah.
when Hogan grabbed Elizabeth after they had defeated Andre the Giant and Ted DiBiase. The look that Randy Savage gave him spoke volumes. And again, that Royal Rumble that year, where Hogan eliminated Savage, and it looked like they were going to come to blows. But it finally came to a head February 3rd in the main event, where Savage would turn on Hulk Hogan and the Mega Powers would explode. The ratings for that night, Dan, 11.6.
Ratings. Again, I'll reserve comment till after the show at the end because we're gonna bring it back around.
Yep. And which brings us to today, February 5th, 1984. I also remember this date. We said goodbye, as we're saying goodbye to the great Kurt Douglas today. Well, February 5th, 1984, was the death of Rodolfo Guzman Huerta, who died of a heart attack at the age of 66. But this man wrestled for nearly 50 years and was a star in television and in movies. Made over 55 movies and was a legend in his hometown in Mexico. Held every title in Mexico: Mexican welterweight, light heavyweight, middleweight champion, and tag team champion. But he died on this day in 1984 at the age of 66. The death of El Santo.
Santo.
Uh, he's often been cited as the person who was never publicly unmasked after a match, but a week before his death on a Mexican morning talk show, he pulled up his mask to reveal his face. The only time to this day many people have ever seen
Never
him.
seen his face. Yep.
He died a week later. His death made the Guinness Book of World Records as the largest funeral ever for a private citizen. More than 110,000 people came out to see his funeral. A statue still stands in Mexico where he was buried, and he was buried in his mask. The legend of the mask, tried and true heritage by Mexican wrestlers throughout wrestling, not just from the 50s through the 60s, 70s, 80s, up until today. Uh, like Psychosis, Eddie Guerrero, Juventud Guerrera, way up to Rey Mysterio today, wearing the mask is a sacred, uh, almost a
Yeah.
religion.
Yes.
Uh, Eddie Guerrero is still the only wrestler to voluntarily take off his mask,
Yep.
not to dishonor the heritage of masked wrestling, but only to honor his family name
Yep.
of Guerrero, which is why he voluntarily took off the mask. But the most popular, nothing against Rey Mysterio, nothing against Mil Mascaras, but the most popular masked wrestler of all time died on this day, 1984, Rodolfo Guzman Huerta, El Santo, the Saint. And on this same day, uh, today, 1988, I mentioned the main event that happened. Well, on February 5th, 1988, was when wrestling aired on primetime television for the first time since 1955. The main event
Wow.
premiered on this date, 1988, prime time, for the first time in 33 years. I had to work this day because I worked retail, and I begged my mom to tape it for me. And like every mom on earth, she had no idea what was happening. And I was trying to talk her through, and she had the phone up. He goes, "What am I pressing?" And she has the phone up. I could hear the TV and Vince McMahon's commentary. Andre the Giant has pinned Hulk Hogan, but his shoulders were up. And it was then we found out the Earl Dave Earl Hebner, um, the referee, paid off by Ted DiBiase. I assumed at the time paid off to have plastic surgery to look just like the referee. Little did I know that they were twins. But Andre the Giant would defeat Hulk Hogan, ending Hulk Hogan's 4-year run. I said at the very beginning of this Wrestling Historian segment, Hulk Hogan won the title January 23rd, 1984. Well, he lost it on this date, February 5th, 1988, ending a 4-year reign, which would be still the third longest reign in WWF history, behind only Bruno Sammartino and Bob Backlund.
Wow.
But on this date, uh, wrestling returned to primetime television for the first time since 1955, and the rating for this particular broadcast, when Andre the Giant defeated Hulk Hogan, 15.2.
Jesus.
I was going to say also on this date, 1994, was the night the line was crossed, the first one,
Mhm.
because so many iconic things happened right here in Philly on this date, on the night the line was crossed. Jimmy Snuka would defeat Tommy Dreamer, Dan, but not before Tommy Dreamer kicked out of the Superfly Splash. And by doing so, Tommy Dreamer went from a suspended white meat babyface to hey, this kid's pretty tough. So even in a loss, that was Tommy Dreamer's coming out party. He would kick out of the Superfly Splash. At the time, he was called the first man to kick out of Superfly Splash, but wrestling historians like me know that that wasn't the first time someone had kicked out,
No.
but it was the first time we had seen it.
Yep.
It's the first time anyone in Philadelphia had seen it. That same card, Dan. You remember the beginning of the ECW program? They showed the great high spots in ECW history. Well, in this one, Mike Awesome came over the top rope and hit JT Smith on the over the top rope and ran into JT Smith. It looked like it broke JT Smith back in half. Well, that occurred on this card. Even though people just remember the dive, but it was JT Smith who actually pinned Mike Awesome in that match. But all everyone remembers is Mike Awesome making that over the top rope splash on a JT Smith, and I thought it legitimately broke his back.
Highlight for
But
years.
highlight free, but JT Smith actually would win that match against Mike Awesome. On the main event of that same card, the ECW heavyweight champion Terry Funk would take on the ECW TV champion Sabu and the franchise Shane Douglas, managed by Sensational Sherry, and they would go to a 60-minute draw. Uh,
Jeez.
and it was after that match where Sabu was taken out, carried out by his people. Terry Funk had to be assisted out, and Shane Douglas, though, walked out under his own power. And Shane Douglas, to him, thought that that should make him the ECW heavyweight champion. And he gave an epic promo running down everyone. Philadelphia, you witnessed it live. And you see, I don't have a mark on my body. I walked out under my own power. And Terry Funk came out, goes, "What's the matter with you?" I said nice things about you. I said nice things about Sabu. And yeah, maybe I have seen better days. But you didn't walk out of here with the ECW title, and you know you didn't. Yeah, look, and look, don't you call me an old man, okay? And I'll tell you what I'll do. You want this belt so badly? Here, I'm giving it to you. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, isn't that funny? Oh, that's so funny. Isn't that funny? No, Todd, be quiet. No, I apologize. I didn't mean to sound this. But you, Shane, you keep that belt. See, because no, the funny thing is, will be when I win the thing back from you. See, that'll be the funny part. Then you'll find out that this old man is not as easy to push around as you thought. You should have found out tonight. And Shane goes, "Well, tell you what, you son of a," and he throws the belt back. Terry slaps Shane. They get into a fight, and that's the night the line was crossed.
Terry, man.
26 years ago today.
Terry. Not only did he help put ECW on the map, but he kept the career longevity for Terry Funk is unfathomable.
It
I
really
barely
is.
said
I
that
mean,
word.
yeah. And it was, well, you did better than Shane Douglas saying obliterate. But
But it's the
I
stupidest
smashed
thing
his knee to obliterate.
Obligatory.
But the speech that Terry Funk made after this match, with legitimate tears in his eyes, and he said, "I love you people.
I
You
love
the
you
fans.
people.
I love you people. And just for you, the Tommy Dreamers and the Sandmans and all the other guys, you're the one that makes me go." Now this was 19 years
Yeah.
after he was the NWA champion. And here he is, the ECW heavyweight champion, going toe to toe with guys at twice his age, Sabu and Shane Douglas, in a 60-minute draw.
Insane.
Insane. But that's the night the line was crossed with 1994, 26 years ago today. And that, my friends, gentlemen and ladies, is called the Wrestling
Much.
Historian.
What word? What word was Shane even trying to say?
I think we're trying to say I obliterated it.
Obligatory though? Obliterate.
Obliterate. And he was
I
trying to say obliterated, and I smashed it to smithereens or something. But
and you
I
know what's
smashed it to
funny is Sherry stands there and she doesn't break.
no.
She doesn't move. Unlike when Booker T told Hulk Hogan, "We're coming for you," and, what
And
I love about that clip is Booker T says, "We're coming for you,"
and
and then
word.
he puts his hands up, and turns around, and Sherry just taps his face like, "Nope, baby, we're live. Turn back around, commit. It's okay. Just keep going."
Yes.
It's one of my favorite things. So we're talking about ratings, and Polygon Princess chimed in with this very good blurb, comment. It's longer than a
Mhm.
comment. It was just a very good comment. I think the ratings going down is both a frustration for years with the creative product. They went so long without any semblance of competition, they had zero incentive to improve. This is in conjunction with their inability to create household names since John Cena and TV in general being a dying platform. It's that last part that I was honing in on, is that TV is becoming a dying platform. But we're also
Mhm.
we're in this weird thing where we're in the middle of digital TV becoming the new TV. Like we went from cord cutting to having as many streaming platforms as we used to, and going up to the same price, to people not wanting to watch on TV anyway. And yes, exactly, Polygon Princess. We're in a weird transitional period. Um, Add to the fact that I want to add on to that, which Justin kind of made me contemplate last week. Um, that maybe the ratings were so big. Like you and I talk about the ratings, and Jim Cornette talks about ratings in the old days in the '80s. But people were watching wrestling as a legitimate sporting event,
Yeah.
or even though they knew it wasn't a legitimate sporting event, they were watching it because it was still a sporting event in that way. And once
Yes.
kayfabe was broken with the Vince McMahon thing and all that, that was another breakdown of wrestling where it changed, where it was like we're winking now,
Mhm.
ding, and there was this weird boom. That's not weird boom, but you know how the Monday Night Wars went, and we're talking
Mhm.
about the numbers they were hitting, and now the wrestling quality is as good as it. Well, depending on who you talk to, I think there's great wrestling out there. Raw
Yeah.
had great matches. SmackDown has great matches. NWA has great matches. I'm so glad I can say those words again. Uh,
Yes.
Impact, I don't know because I refuse to watch because of what's his name and who's he
Yeah.
what's it's.
Mhm.
Both of them, her and him. Um, AEW's got good matches. NXT's got fantastic matches. It occurred to him that perhaps it's the segments, not the wrestling, and people don't want to watch that, and that's why the ratings are not going up. But it's a mixture of
Mhm.
all these things that Polygon mentioned, that you mentioned, that I mentioned. It's just a weird time, and we always talk about how wrestling always has a downturn, and it always pulls out of it. And at this
Mhm.
point, I'm wondering when it's going to pull out of it because it's been a long time now. It's been a long time. It's unfathomable. I said it twice, and I got through it. The ratings you mentioned, and as Polygon pointed this out to me in the chat, that SmackDown is literally getting the same ratings they were getting on USA on Fox.
Yeah.
Zero change, very
Mhm.
little change, and they're both free. So what is it?
Um, it's hard really to pinpoint. With there is not one central figure coming out that I can see that could galvanize uh, a fan base or just cross different platforms. Hulk Hogan was the guy at the right place at the right time.
Sure.
And I've debated with Diane, and we've debated on this show. If it wasn't Hogan in 1984, who could have done it? Who would have done it? Um, as far as popularity goes, Sergeant Slaughter would have been perfect. He had the feud with the Iron Sheik. But as far as someone that can take it mainstream, I don't. Slaughter would not have been the guy. I don't think it could have been Kerry Von Erich. Really don't think it could have been Dusty Rhodes. Hogan was someone that, I mean, and especially coming on off of Rocky 3, his popularity was such that you could market him and you could work around his limitations. And because of his size and his physique, uh, 5 minute matches, 6 minute matches would be enough to fill, to sell out every arena in the United States 3 or 4 times over, and can carry the federation to the point where they can have three different events going on the same day in three different parts of the country and have them all sell out because of Hogan. And we didn't get that again until 14 years later with Steve Austin. But who would know that that there would be an attitude shift, and that Steve Austin would be the guy that would sell out arenas, that would take wrestling mainstream, that would just flipping people off or beating up your boss is what everyone in America wanted at the time. Who would know that?
Yeah.
Who knew? Who knew that Kurt Angle, who in all intents and purposes should be your number one babyface, is booed out of the building
Building, yeah.
for saying that he's an Olympic gold medal winner that drinks milk.
Polygon brought up another point: is wrestling was big when their star transcended wrestling.
Yeah,
Everyone knew who Hulk Hogan was. Everyone knew who Steve Austin was. Everyone knew who The Rock was. Everyone knows who John Cena is. Who outside
and
of wrestling knows who Roman Reigns is?
no one. And even the Goldberg, when WCW was winning the Monday Night Wars, Goldberg was
Yeah,
another one that transcended
yeah.
um different, that was mainstream media.
No,
But
oh, go ahead.
um,
Sorry. No, no. Finish.
but no, I don't see I don't see anyone in this current crop that has that appeal. I mean, putting Roman Reigns on Fox and on the Super Bowl halftime show is not going to, make
Yeah,
him someone that they're going to cast in sitcoms and make appearances on, shows. I mean, The Rock was a presenter on the Oscars when he was still wrestling,
yeah.
towards the end of his wrestling career.
That's true.
So I don't see anyone else. Not that they couldn't, but I really don't see anyone that has that one guy that you can look at and say, yeah, I can build around this one. And that's not a knock at Cena either, because Cena is the closest thing you have
Sure.
to the mainstream star, but he didn't pull anywhere near. As far as wrestling goes, he's probably the greatest champion they've had, because no one in 15 years has had to run like he had. Not even Bruno. But as far as mainstream goes, he's he's more so now, but he wasn't that when he was wrestling.
You also have the evolution of the product as far as representation, and another point Polygon brought up. I'm glad she's in the
Mm.
stream tonight.
I am
Uh,
glad too. Thank you, Polygon.
uh, the Polygon, no, that's her. The representation of women, and in some ways they haven't. The product has evolved like the representation of women, and in some ways they haven't. For example, people of color still not getting most of the top opportunities, using LGBTQ people to this day as comedic props. AEW. Um, One example is Goldust in the past, Sonny
Hmm.
Kiss. Sonny Kiss has ability as much as anybody else as far as in ring, and it's yet to be featured. Nyla Rose should have been the catalyst of the women's division in AEW, and
And
it's not.
yeah,
I don't mind Rio and what they've done, but that was a no-brainer to
yeah.
me.
Well, to me,
Oh, go ahead.
well, see, the no-brainer to me, the no-brainer to me in AEW is, why not have Kia Stevens, who's on a top-rated Netflix show on Glow, and why not who has the most big match experience out of all the women there? Why not have Nyla and Awesome Kong as your top two? But I know that's all Kenny Omega's, fantasy. Why would you have a 98-pound woman as your world champion when you've got two legitimate badass stars, especially one with already who has a mainstream following? Um,
Polygon is bringing up the point about Kia that it might be her body just being beat up, that it might be her decision on that part.
okay, but
Oh,
still, why isn't she featured more prominently?
I don't know.
She doesn't have to
Manager.
wrestle.
Yeah, exactly. You knocked out You knocked out color and LGBTQ with Nyla and Awesome Kong.
Yeah.
And it's not like and if you're sitting there and you're old and you're like forced down my throat, that is not how it works. That's another thing I want to be clear. Nobody is being forced down your throat. It's just that the representation is changing. These people who you've scared into hiding for years, for over 2 centuries, are no longer afraid to hide, and they just want to live their lives comfortably and free of your BS and your I'm going to get on a soapbox for a second, and your uh, um, ignorance and your destruction and just want to be and exist is not the same thing as being forced down your throat. That you don't, you know what's being forced? Slavery is being forced.
Hmm.
That's forced.
Yeah.
So please spare me. Spare me. I don't give it. And if you feel that way and you don't like what I'm saying and I've affected you in that way, unfollow, unsubscribe, unfriend, get the F out. Don't care what you feel. It's not being forced down your throat, it's just being inclusive. They still have to try harder
Hmm.
because of this veil of, well, this is the club and this is part of the club and you can't be part of the club. Them days are over. Again, I've stated 100 times before, and Craig, you correct me if I'm out of line. You think I'm out of line at all. What was okay 20 years ago in your mind wasn't okay. It was just accepted, and it's not accepted anymore. Um,
Hmm.
Nyla Rose is not being shoved down your throat. If she was,
No.
she'd be the champion. And you
Yeah.
know who I'm talking about, big guy who gets booked in one company and won't get booked anywhere else because you're a bum and you're scum and you suck at your job. There's a difference.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, it fired me up. It's inclusivity. It's not being forced down your throat. There is a huge difference.
Hmm.
Speaking of ratings,
Yes.
the comment that was made about nobody wanted to watch women, which was what I was trying to tie into earlier, that that's being partially blamed for the ratings. No, it's just that the as Polygon said, it's all changing now. How you take wrestling, everybody, for example,
Hmm.
everybody. I say everybody. I can't say everybody. A lot of people was slamming the Bobby Lashley and Lana and Rusev thing.
Hmm.
It was getting millions of views on YouTube.
Yeah.
What do you write a segment for next week? Just
Yeah.
saying.
That's that. Hmm.
So support what you like. That's what it needs. Numbers. Just saying.
Hmm.
Absolutely, people that still have to work harder to achieve. Here's a good example: Lucha Underground. So many people found out about Lucha Underground through Netflix. Didn't even know El Rey Network existed. I used to. Why did I didn't even know? It's weird. El Rey Network aired a movie that I wanted to watch that I hadn't seen in years, and I found out the El Rey Network existed because of that. Then I found out Lucha Underground was on there, and then I went back to Netflix. It was a weird backwards connection because I'm out of this world. Anyway, Craig,
Sir.
I think we have done a great show this week.
Yeah. We
Um,
couldn't have done it without you.
well, I could have done it without you and Zoom. Skype is the devil, and it will never be used for this show ever again. I'm actually uninstalling it and deleting it. And as I said on Stadium Journey, when I click the button to get rid of it, I'm going to click it really hard on the mouth to get out of here. Craig, you
Okay.
actually have a show coming up on
I do
Valentine's
have.
Day.
I do have a show coming up on
And show.
Valentine's Day. It's called My Life in 19 Inches. It's a story I tell through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s up to today about my love of television and how television has shaped my life from puberty to adultery. It takes place next Friday, the 14th, at the Rotunda at 40th and Walnut if you're in the Philly area. If you are, come on down. Tickets are $15 if you get them there at the theater, but they're only $10 if you want to get them online. And you can get them at therotunda.org. I want to thank Preston Elliott for plugging this show this morning and on Monday morning when he shared my stupid question. It is Black History Month, the only month when I'm actually relevant, as opposed to here where I'm relevant every single week.
I was gonna say.
But it's Black History Month. And if you're a follower of me on Facebook and Instagram and on Twitter, that's at Craig Lagans, CraigLigeons. I will be debuting my new Black History Month poster tomorrow morning.
Oh,
Uh,
I'm
sh-
looking forward to that. I saw a
with
photo shoot was happening.
Yes, chat with the beautiful Alison Dunlap, the official photographer of the President Steve Totally Off His Calendar. She and her two beautiful boys, Rex and Robbie, were on hand to help me out. So the new Black History 2020 poster will be debuted tomorrow morning,
Uh,
and I really hope you enjoy it.
you ever gonna do an anniversary song?
You know what? 10 years was 2018.
Just
That
saying.
would have been a good time to do it. We're having our Black Listening get together
I heard, yeah.
right before my show, February 14th. So hopefully we can get something together then.
You
But
guys aren't
from
doing the in studio stuff anymore?
that was passed down by I don't want to throw Bill Weston, Man About Town, under the bus. This
Okay,
might have
never mind.
been something
Ne-
that was done by his bosses,
cut.
but not only is the Black Listener Party not being held in the studio anymore, neither is Drunk Day. There's no more St. Patrick's Day telecasts.
Well,
So many traditions have fallen that have made the President Steve show great over the years are no more, and that unfortunately was one of them.
well,
Yeah.
no comment. Follow me on Twitter at Danlo83. The HIAC Talk Radio Network is on VOC Nation Radio Network. Search that term for Apple Podcasts and Android Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Polygon Princess, V-Roll, and all the other listeners in the room. It has been fun. I'm glad you came here. Follow all the social media platforms. If you want to listen on your computer, thebradyhicks.com. Go to other shows. Follow all of our episodes there. Or just follow me on Twitter, and I'll share all the links at Danlo83. As I said, for Craig Lagans, I am the above average comedian Dan Calchica. We'll see you next week. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.